I didn't thank them. I didn't hug anyone. I picked up my diploma, walked off the stage, and kept moving. My parents were in the third row. I saw them. My mum was already looking down at her phone. My dad had his arms crossed. Neither of them stood up. Half the auditorium was on their feet for other graduates, strangers' kids, but my parents sat still like they'd come to the wrong event and were waiting to leave. I had graduated with honours from the University of Calgary with a degree in accounting. I had a job offer already signed. I had done everything I was supposed to do and more, but I already knew what was coming because I'd heard it my entire life. After the ceremony, we went to a restaurant my mum had picked. She ordered wine. My dad cut into his steak. And then, somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, my mum smiled at me in that particular way she had, the one that never reached her eyes, and said, "Your brother's offer from UBC was incredible. Full scholarship. You know they only accept the top 2%. I said nothing. "You should call him and congratulate him properly," my dad added. "He's really making something of himself." My brother was 20. He was starting a software engineering program in Vancouver in September. He was brilliant, genuinely, and I had no problem with him. I never had a problem with my brother. My problem was that I was sitting there, 24 years old, holding a degree I'd worked myself to exhaustion for, and my parents were talking about someone else. I put my fork down. I folded my napkin. I said, "I have an early morning." I drove home alone. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just started counting. I should explain the counting, because it matters. I had been keeping a spreadsheet since I was 19, not out of paranoia, at least not at first. I started it because I was paying my own way through university, and I needed to track every dollar. Tuition, books, transit, groceries, the $340 a month room I rented from an older woman in Brentwood who let me use her laundry machine on Sundays. I tracked everything because I couldn't afford not to. But somewhere around second year, I started adding another column, a separate tab hidden at the bottom. I called it the other side. Anytime my parents mentioned something they'd given my brother, a new laptop, a trip for a school competition, the respite aid apparently been contributing to since he was born, I wrote it down. Estimates where I had to, actual numbers when I could find them. By the time I graduated, that tab had a total. It was $47,200. That was my best estimate of what my brother had received, that I had not. It wasn't money they owed me. I understood that. Parents aren't obligated to give their children equal amounts. But I kept the number anyway, because it helped me understand something clearly. This wasn't about money. It was about who they saw when they looked at each of us. My brother was an investment. I was an afterthought who had stopped being convenient. After that dinner, I made a decision. I moved to Edmonton for the job. I didn't make an announcement. I packed what fit in my car, put the rest in a small storage unit, and drove north on a Tuesday in August. I sent my parents a text that said I was relocating for work and that I'd be in touch. My mum replied with a thumbs up emoji. My dad didn't respond at all. That was the last real contact for almost 3 years. Edmonton was good to me. The firm I joined was mid-sized, corporate accounts mostly, and I was useful there in a way I hadn't expected to feel. My manager, an older woman named Patricia, who wore the same 3 blazers in rotation and kept a jar of mixed nuts on her desk, told me in my first performance review that I had unusually good instincts for inconsistency. "You catch things," she said. "That's not teachable." I rented a 1-bedroom near White Avenue. I bought a second-hand couch and a coffee maker that I still have. I started running in the mornings because it was free and because I needed something to do with the feeling I carried around. That low-grade background hum of not being enough that I'd grown up with. Running helped, some days. I made friends slowly. A woman from my building named Renata who worked in public health and had strong opinions about everything. A guy from the office, Finn, who was funny in a dry, deadpan way and brought homemade sandwiches every single day without explanation. A small, solid life. Nothing dramatic. I called my brother every few weeks. He was the one relationship I kept intact from home. Carefully, the way you keep a window open in a room that's getting stale. We didn't talk about our parents much. He knew something was wrong there, I think, but he was young and in the middle of his own life, and I didn't want to put that weight on him. So we talked about his projects, my files, the Oilers, bad television. It was easy and I was grateful for it. My parents I heard from occasionally. A Christmas text. A birthday message from my mum that always said, "Thinking of you and nothing else." I replied briefly. I kept the door cracked, but I didn't step through it. I had made a life and I was living it, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like the ground under me was solid. Then my dad called. I almost didn't pick up. It was a Wednesday evening in early November, and I was making pasta and listening to a podcast, and I saw his name on my screen and stood there for a second deciding. I picked up on the fourth ring. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. There was a pause. My dad has never been good at the beginning of conversations. He waits for the other person to take over and then responds, which works fine when you're talking about the weather or a hockey game, and not so well when you're calling someone you haven't actually spoken to in over a year. "How's work?" he asked. "Good," I said. "Busy?" Another pause. "We were hoping you might be able to help us out with something," he said. And there it was. He explained it carefully. The way you explain something to someone you're not sure will cooperate. He and my mum were in a difficult spot financially. Some unexpected expenses. The house needed work, the furnace had gone, the roof was not far behind. They had a line of credit, but it was stretched. They were asking if I could contribute something toward the repairs, just temporarily, just to get them through. $20,000, he said. If I had it. I stood at my stove with the pasta boiling over, and I said, very calmly, "Let me think about it." "Of course," he said. "We appreciate you considering it." After I hung up, I turned off the burner. I sat down on the couch. I thought about the fact that my parents had not called me to congratulate me on my job, had not called when I moved, had not called on my last 2 birthdays, text only, both of them. And now, after 3 years of near silence, my father had called on a Wednesday evening to ask for $20,000. I opened my laptop and I looked at the spreadsheet. Then I called my brother. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he wasn't in class. I asked him how he was. He said fine, good, working on a project. And then I asked him, as casually as I could manage, if Mum and Dad had mentioned anything to him recently about money. There was a silence that told me everything. "They called you too," I said. "Last week," he said. "They told me the furnace died, said they needed help covering some repairs." "How much did they ask you for?" Another pause. 15,000. I did the math quickly. Together they had asked us for $35,000. "Did they say anything to you about asking me?" I said. "No," he said. We were both quiet for a moment. Then my brother said slowly, "That's not great." "No," I agreed, "it's not." I told him I wanted to look into a few things before either of us did anything. He agreed immediately, which told me he'd already had doubts. He said, "Let me know what you find." I said I would. I hung up and opened a new tab on my laptop. I want to be clear about something. I am an accountant. I am specifically an accountant who audits corporate financial records for inconsistencies. I do this for a living. I am, as Patricia once put it, unusually good at it. So when I started quietly looking into my parents' financial situation, it did not take me long. What I found carefully and over several weeks through a combination of public records, a conversation with a family friend who'd known my parents for decades and was willing to talk, and one document my brother photographed at Christmas when he went home and texted to me without comment. The furnace had not died, or if it had been replaced 8 months earlier. There was a permit on file with the city, pulled in February, well before my dad's call in November. The roof was old, but not urgent. Those were not the expenses they were managing. What my parents were managing was a gambling debt, online mostly. It had been building for at least 4 years. The family friend, a woman who'd known my mother since before I was born, and who told me this with genuine grief in her voice, said she'd watched it get worse after I left. "Your dad got into it first," she said. Your mum followed. They hid it well for a while. The total they owed, as best as I could estimate, was somewhere in the range of $60,000 to $80,000. They were behind on property tax. They had refinanced the house once already, and now they were asking their 2 children for $35,000 using home repairs as the reason, without telling either of us that they'd also asked the other. I sat with that for a while. Then I called my brother again. This conversation was harder. My brother is kind by nature. Genuinely, not performatively, and he had a closer relationship with my parents than I did, or at least a less complicated one. He had been the golden child, technically. I don't think he ever felt comfortable in that role, but he'd lived inside it, and dismantling the version of our parents he'd grown up with was going to cost him something. I knew that. I tried to be careful. I told him what I found, all of it. I sent him the documents I'd collected. I waited. He didn't respond for a day and a half. When he did, he called me, not texted, and the first thing he said was, "I didn't know. I want you to know I didn't know." I believed him. I'd always believed him. "I know," I said. "They used me," he said. And his voice was different than I'd ever heard it, quiet in a way that had weight to it. They knew I'd say yes. They told me the furnace, the roof. I was already figuring out how to move money around. I had a plan. "I know," I said again. "How long?" he asked. "The gambling. How long?" "At least 4 years," I said. "Probably longer." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "What do we do?" That was the question I'd been sitting with for 3 weeks. I had a few options laid out in my head, in order of what I was and wasn't willing to do. "First," I said, "we don't send money, either of us." "Agreed," he said immediately. "Second," I said, "we confront them together. Not separately, together, so they can't manage us one at a time." He was quiet for a moment. "And then?" "Then it's up to them," I said. "If they want help getting into a program, getting actual support, I'll think about what that looks like. But the money story, the furnace, the roof, that stops. We're not going to pretend we don't know what's actually happening." My brother exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, okay." We arranged to go home together in January. My brother flew from Vancouver. I drove down from Edmonton. We had not been under the same roof as our parents together in 4 years. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Everything does, I think, when you've been gone long enough and stopped mythologizing it. The driveway had a crack running from the garage to the street. The front garden had been let go. I sat in my car for a few minutes before going in. My brother was already inside. He texted me, "They think we're just visiting. Mom made roast." I went in. My mum hugged me at the door, which surprised me. She smelled the same as she always had, some particular soap, and for a second I felt the complicated thing I always felt, the grief of it, the distance between what this could have been and what it was. Then I stepped back and hung up my coat. Dinner was strange. My parents were performing ease or something close to it. My mum asked about work, about Edmonton, whether I was seeing anyone. My dad talked about the flames. My brother caught my eye once across the table, and I looked away. After dinner, when my mum was moving to clear the plates, I said, "Can we sit for a few minutes? There's something we wanted to talk to you about." My mum sat back down. My dad's expression didn't change exactly, but something shifted in it, a tightening. My brother put his phone face down on the table. I had practiced this in my car, on the drive down, the way I practice everything, out loud, to myself, in different versions. The version I used was the plainest one. "We know about the gambling," I said. "Both of us. We've been talking to each other, and we know you asked us each for money, separately, without telling us you'd asked the other. We know the repairs weren't the reason, and we know this has been going on for a few years." My mum made a sound. My dad said nothing. "We're not here to punish you," I said, "but we're not going to pretend we don't know what's happening. And we're not sending money, not for this." My mum said, "You don't understand what we've been dealing with." "I understand that you lied to us," I said, not loudly, not meanly, just clearly. You told me the furnace died. You told my brother the same thing. You asked us for $35,000 total and didn't tell either of us about the other. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice." My dad looked at the table. My mum started to cry. I had expected this, and I had also expected that it would still be hard to watch, and it was. I waited. "We didn't want you to think less of us," she said. "I would have thought less of you for lying," I said, "not for struggling." My brother spoke then, quietly, and said that he had already looked into a few things. There were resources, there were programs, there was a provincial helpline for gambling addiction that had real support attached to it. He had the information. He printed it out, actually, which was so like him, so careful and prepared that I had to breathe through something in my chest. He put the papers on the table. My parents looked at them. My dad picked one up. "I'm not going to tell you it went smoothly after that. It didn't." My mum spent another 20 minutes explaining why it had happened, the stress, the pandemic years, my dad's work slowing down, the isolation. Some of it was probably true. Probably all of it was true, in the way that context is always true, and also doesn't change what happened. I listened. I didn't argue. I didn't validate the lies either. At one point, my dad looked at me and said, "You always kept your distance. You never made it easy." I said, "I graduated with honours and you talked about my brother's scholarship at dinner that night. I moved to another city and you sent a thumbs up. I wasn't keeping distance. I was protecting myself from people who consistently made me feel invisible." He didn't say anything after that. Before my brother and I left, we had each booked separate hotels, a decision we'd made in advance and didn't explain. My mum stopped me at the door. "Are you going to cut us off?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. The honest answer was that I didn't know yet. "I'm not cutting you off," I said, "but things have to be different. The lying has to stop. If you're struggling, you tell us what's actually happening. We're adults. We can handle the truth. What we can't handle is being managed." She nodded. Her eyes were red. I walked to my car. That was 14 months ago. Here is what happened after. My parents did call the helpline. My brother followed up on it, gently, persistently, in the way that he does things, quietly and without drama. They saw a counsellor for several months. My dad, I think, genuinely engaged with it. My mum is harder to read, but she's trying or doing something that looks like trying. They have not asked of us for money again. My relationship with my parents is not repaired. I don't think repair is the right word for what I'm hoping for. I talk to my mum on the phone once or twice a month. The conversations are shorter and more honest than they used to be. Less performance, more silence, but a different kind of silence. My dad texts me occasionally. Nothing deep, just things he sees that remind him of me. A news article about accounting regulation. A photo of a dog that looked like one I had as a kid. Small things. I respond. I'm not sure where it goes from here. My brother and I are closer than we have ever been. That I didn't expect. He called me last spring and said, "I've been thinking about it, and I want you to know that I'm sorry. For all the years I had what you didn't. I didn't ask for it, but I had it, and it cost you something. I'm sorry for that." I told him it wasn't his fault. He said he knew that, but he still wanted to say it. We talked for 2 hours. At the end of it, I felt something shift. Something that had been braced for a long time, finally letting go. I still have the spreadsheet. I don't update it anymore. But I haven't deleted it either. I look at it sometimes, not out of anger, or not only out of anger, but to remember that I have always been someone who tracked what was happening, who paid attention, who kept receipts, literally and otherwise. That instinct kept me from sending $20,000 to cover a debt my parents were too ashamed to name. It kept me from being managed. I am 31 years old. I live in Edmonton, in a different apartment now, a nicer one, with a view of the river valley that I never get tired of. I have a job I'm good at. I have people I trust. I run in the mornings when the weather allows, and sometimes when it doesn't, because this is Alberta, and waiting for good weather in February is a fool's errand. My parents told me my whole life in 100 small ways that I would never measure up. What they didn't understand is that I was never trying to measure up to anything they were holding. I was building something of my own, on my own terms, with my own numbers. And the math in the end worked out just fine. I think about that spreadsheet a lot. Not the numbers in it, but the fact that I started it at 19, alone in a rented room, because I had learned early that no one else was going to keep track for me. At the time, I thought it was just practical. Now I think it was something more than that. It was the first honest thing I built for myself. There's a version of this story where I send the money, where I believe the furnace story, wire the $20,000, and spend the next few years quietly wondering why I always feel like I'm running a deficit I never chose. A lot of people live that version. I almost did. What stopped me wasn't luck, it was the habit of paying attention, of asking questions, of not accepting the first explanation when something didn't sit right. That's not a gift anyone gave me. It's something I practiced out of necessity for years. My parents built a household where one child was an investment and the other was expected to be grateful for scraps of attention. That dynamic doesn't just hurt the child who gets less, it distorts everyone inside it. My brother spent years being held up as the standard I was supposed to reach, and he hadn't asked for that. When the whole thing finally came apart, he was the one who said, "I'm sorry," not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he had enough integrity to understand that proximity to unfairness is its own kind of participation. That took real honesty. I don't think he knows how much I respect him for it. What my parents did, using two separate children as separate ATMs, lying about the reason, trusting that we'd never compare notes, only worked if we stayed divided. The moment my brother and I started talking to each other directly, the whole thing collapsed. That's the part that stays with me. The strategy depended entirely on us not trusting each other, and they'd spent years, without realizing it, building exactly the conditions that would eventually make us trust each other completely. You can't manufacture that kind of bond. It comes from going through something real together. I'm not carrying anger about most of this anymore. What I'm carrying is clarity, which feels different, lighter, more useful. I know who I am when things get hard. I know that I can sit with an uncomfortable truth without flinching away from it. I know that being the child who was overlooked, who had to figure things out alone, who got the thumbs up emoji when she moved cities, that experience sharpened something in me that no amount of respite money could have bought. If I could say anything to someone living a quieter version of this story, still waiting to be seen by people who have already shown you exactly how they see you, it would be this. The accounting matters. Keep track, not out of bitterness, but because clarity is a form of self-respect. Know what's real, ask the question, make the call, and trust the person on the other end of the phone more than you trust the story you've been told your whole life about what you're worth. The math in the end is always honest. People aren't always, that's the difference.